This is Atheistically Speaking bonus content.
Joining me right now is Sarah Haider. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing real well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to speak to you. I've been following you for quite a while. I think it was that talk, it was at American Humanist Conference, I want to say it was. That was when... Yeah, I that must have been a big thing because I noticed after that it seemed like you were everywhere. So and it has a ton of views on YouTube. So that's a really cool thing. And ever since then, I've kind of kept an eye on you, and I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So why don't you tell us, for the people who aren't familiar with you, a little bit about, your experience being an ex-Muslim now and how that went for you in your early life and stuff like that.
So I grew up with, what I would call liberal parents, like we're a liberal family, in a Muslim context, which is just to say that I was allowed freedoms that I think that many Muslims, even most Muslim women, aren't allowed, even in the Western world. And so to that extent, I had it easy growing up as a Muslim woman. And by that, I mean, I was able to move out for college. I mean, it was a real struggle to get there, but I convinced my parents that, it would be okay. It would be safe for me to live on my own for a bit. And so in that sense, I grew up in a much more liberal and tolerant atmosphere. Having said that, it's not very liberal or very tolerant if you think about it from an American perspective, if you look at it from a Western perspective and the freedoms that we usually give to, especially our girls. So in that perspective, it doesn't. So I think that I do have an interesting view on what it's like to be a Muslim in America.
Right, because you came, if I remember right, you came over to America at, I want to say like age 8, you said?
Right. We moved from, my family immigrated from Pakistan. And I was, I think 7 or 8. I'm not actually quite sure how old I was, but I think I remember celebrating my 8th birthday in America. So I was here then, and the immigrant experience is very interesting. I think it takes longer than what people would assume for immigrants to truly absorb the culture around them, especially if it is a culture like Pakistan, which is so different in almost every measurable sense of the term. So it takes a lot longer than what people assume, sometimes even several generations for immigrants, I think, to fully acclimate and behave in the way that the average American would. But it is possible, and it is something that we should encourage. And I think my story and the story of my family, which is that we have evolved, we've gotten more tolerant, we've gotten more liberal, is encouraging, but is also educating in the sense that it does take time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of, pushing from one side to get immigrants to be more liberal.
Can I ask real quick, do you have a firm memory of, or some firm memories of when you were in Pakistan, like how your family dynamic might have been different, or was it too young for you to be able to tell?
Well, I remember, and the thing is, it wasn't immediately different when we got here. I mean, we behaved as if we were in Pakistan for a long time, for many years. Things started to change a little bit, and my mom started working. And like I said, my father has always been a little bit more liberal than the average, Muslim Pakistani man. So,
but we would still, like typical Americans might still think of as pretty conservative, right?
Right. I think very conservative in what we would consider regular American, I guess, in the sense that I'm not sure exactly how to best illustrate it, but I could say going out, for example, for the females of the household is frowned upon. You don't really go out after they have very strict curfews, even adult women. So I could go home right now, and I'm an adult woman who lives on her own and supports herself. But if I go home, suddenly I have a curfew on my head.
Oh, wow.
Right. And it's strange, but they don't want other Muslims to see me and, to see me out, and it would be a shame on them. So
it's one of those things. And that's not a function of age. That's just because you're a woman. That's all it is. It's not like,
right.
because there's
because
still
I'm a
technically,
woman yeah. It would be different if I, had a husband and I was going out with him. Then it's okay.
Then it's his problem. Oh. Gotcha. Okay, interesting. So that started to slowly change, and would you say your parents have also gotten more liberal? It's not just you being the first generation kind of in America. It's have your parents grown more liberal as well from the experience?
Yeah, I think they're much more liberal now. They're much more tolerant now, and they're educated people to begin with. So I
Mm-hmm.
think they have a little bit of a heads up. And immigrants to the United States tend to be more educated. It's harder to immigrate here than it is to say go to the UK or even Canada. So the
Mm.
immigrants that come here, Muslim immigrants, tend to be more educated, and as a consequence, I think a little bit more liberal to begin with, or a little bit more accepting of liberal values once they are introduced to them. So things improved, I think, and they have over time, and that has been encouraging to me.
That's awesome. So, you didn't talk much about losing your faith, if you don't mind. What was that process like for you?
It was like having the rug pulled out from underneath my feet. It felt like my world was just so radically different, and I couldn't recognize anything around me.
Hmm.
I would say it's like taking off blinders, or just I'm not sure how else to describe it, but
Was
it
there like
was
a catalyst that you can remember that really set it off for you?
well, there were many catalysts
Hmm.
that sort of led to it, but it just all came to a head, in 1 year, very, very close. Like, it took me maybe, I would say, a couple of months
Wow.
to begin to question and then to lose it. And I was always a questioning person, which is to say, I always tried to poke holes into things. I tried to find the reason why, say, God would do, X, Y, Z, and I would pressure my religious instructors to explain things to me, and I wouldn't really accept any narrative as it was given. But a lot of things just happened very, very quickly that sort of shattered the whole like veneer that religion had for me. And some of it was looking into philosophy, reading about what morality is, how we understand morality, what objective morality is, what subjective morality is, the problem of evil, and all these different atheist lines of thinking. I was introduced to some of those.
So what? But so who was introducing you to those? Was there a conflict with your parents about that at all, or were they pretty easygoing, or were you sneaking in some atheist literature or something, or how did that go?
Well, I think my parents, they allowed me to read whatever I wanted. I think they
Hmm.
they couldn't have imagined that it would lead to where it did.
Oh.
I think if they had known, things might be different, but I don't think they knew where it was going to go, because it's atheism is so unheard of
Right.
from Muslim cultures. It's looked at as a Western phenomena. It's experienced as a Western phenomena. It doesn't really happen to Muslims, as or so most Muslims think. I think the apostasy stigma is just so extreme, and the lack of knowledge about religion and non-religion it creates this atmosphere where there are just really no atheists that and people just aren't willing to talk about religion openly anyway. So
Hmm.
you wouldn't know it if they were around you. So I don't think they thought that any literature I had was going to take me there. But even it was stuff about debunking Christianity. I read things
Hmm.
about how the Christ-like figure, is exists in so many different myths, way before Jesus, as we think of him from the Christian myth, existed. And it was things like that started to make me question the Quran too, because I started applying that same sort of thinking to Islamic myths. What didn't help was being introduced to, I guess, what you would call militant atheists, because I joined the debate team, and there were just so many there. It's one of those. The debate team, I think, is one of those places where it's
Is this
difficult not to
high
be an
school or
atheist.
college?
This was high school.
High school.
This was
Okay.
high school,
Gotcha.
and there were many atheists there, and they were happy to debate others, and they
Hmm.
loved it, and they liked to talk about it. And so I met a few of those. They started questioning me directly about my faith, and that was the first time I think I really thought about it in depth, mostly to debunk them, because I wanted to prove them wrong. And then when I looked into it closer myself, I realized that they had a point. They were
And you
right.
lost the debate. They won.
I lost. Well,
They
well,
won the
I you know,
trophy. No, I'm just kidding.
I never, I don't think these people know that they had
Oh.
this effect on me, because I just sort of started looking into it myself, I would Google these things, read up, and figure it out, and then you have this sense of like the sense of shame because you think, oh, I've been duped.
Well,
I thought
that's
this was
usually
real.
how it works. Like people don't change their mind on the spot. It never happens. But
Right.
it's really cool that it can start a process. And it sounds like it did for you of, a little bit of grain of doubt. And then if you're someone who actually likes to research things and, look into the matter and don't just ignore it, then it can change a person's mind.
Right. And I think that's why being an outspoken atheist is important. And it's one thing to be, an asshole and get in people's faces, but it's another to be open about it, to be ready to just say that, well, this is a, religious teaching and you're free to believe it, but I think it's nonsense.
Wow,
you can
that's interesting. Yeah, can we talk about that a little bit? Because I'm just thinking, and I want to pause on your journey. Definitely, I want to get back to it. But I was just thinking because I've said before on this show, like I'm not really an out atheist. Like people, I mean, if someone asks me, I'll tell them. I don't pretend or anything. But I wonder because there's a couple of different lenses that I'm looking at this through for you, because there's one thing to be an atheist just in America. That's a separate issue. And then there's the whole ex-Muslim part of it, which is like an entirely different can of worms. So I just wonder, in your like regular adult life, are you just out atheist all the time? Like, are you pretty open with it, or?
As much as it's appropriate. So if at work, I don't bring it in because I don't think, religion or politics really belong at work in general. But if I'm socializing with friends, I'll talk about it. I'll bring it up. I think it's very difficult to get rid of that hesitancy to be open about our atheism. I think a lot of us are weirdly embarrassed about it. And I understand that feeling, but at the same time, it's really harmful. I think it keeps people in religion when, there are a lot of people who they just really haven't stopped to think about it for 2 seconds. And if they think about it for just a couple of days, they'll reach the conclusion,
Yeah. I think, yeah, totally. And I think most people in America, I can only speak to, kind of my experience, but most people are probably cool with you or I saying, oh yeah, I'm an atheist. Let's say it's a party or something and the topic comes up for some reason. Most people are cool, but there's always that one, you're never sure. There could be that one person, Brenda. Yeah. Brenda's at the party. Right. She's like, oh my, you don't accept Jesus. And then there's a whole scene, like it's just, there's always a risk in the US, a little bit, maybe,
There is, absolutely. But I think we still have to put ourselves in that situation, even though it's an awkward one. And even though
you might ruin your party,
you might ruin the party. But, I think there are ways of going about it that aren't, religious criticism, no matter how, how much you sugar it up, it's going to be a bitter pill to swallow for the very religious, no matter what. There's really no way of sugarcoating it. But I think that that's what we got to do. We got to bring it up when they least suspect it. They're at a party, they're having a good time, and here it comes. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but I think that at least not hiding it, at least not being ashamed about it. And if it is relevant to a conversation, I'll bring it up. I'll talk about it, and I'll say, hey, I respect you as a person. I don't respect this belief. It doesn't make sense to me, and I don't see how anyone else would. I have lost religious friends, many religious friends, when I began to be more out and open about my atheism. And that's a shame, but quite a few stayed. And I think their opinion on religion has changed just by, being associated with me. So I think that's something. I think that's positive.
Yeah, that's a good point. So debate team, you back to the timeline here.
Right. So I joined the debate team, and, this was around the time I was looking into this anyway and thinking about these things. And that sort of, it gave me these tools of thinking, being a part of a debate team, because I don't know if all your audience will be familiar, but I bet many are. I know a lot of atheists who have experience with like a debate team or a debate club at some time, but just that you have to have this ability of looking at anything from from both sides and being able to argue it well. And so you get to learn rhetorical tricks, and ways of rational thinking and pulling apart arguments. And those are like, once you're armed with it, it's hard not to apply it to everything. I mean, it was for me. It was hard. It was for me difficult not to apply it to everything, including religion. So once that happened, my religious faith, there was no way it was gonna, even if I had tried to stay religious, and I actually did. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to hold on to my faith and keep it, and in doing so, I lost it.
And you said that only took like 2 months or something?
It took a couple of months. I don't know about 2. It's hard. I don't remember it. It's just
sure. Yeah, it's kind of a gradual thing.
It was a blur when I first actively started looking into it. I mean, that period was very.
But I mean, when I hear that, though, that sounds like a shockingly short amount of time. Now, I'm sure you've spoken to a lot of converts to atheists, or deconverts, I guess. Has that been just anecdotally? Because to me it seems short, but is it
that
what's
is
your
short.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
because I've definitely spoken to people where it's like, well, for 10 years I was thinking. So that's interesting. I think that's interesting to note. I wonder if any of that could be attributed to the fact that for Muslims your parents were liberal already. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I think it had to do with a lot of things. For one,
sure, lots of factors.
I was sort of building the skills I needed to dismantle faith really quickly once I began to look at it, for a long time. And I was pretty well versed in my faith. So a lot of people assume that I was just one of those Americanized Muslims who didn't know anything about Islam. I mean, I knew a lot about Islam. I knew a lot about my faith. I even, I participated. There was a local Sunday school, was this small little thing. And I not only did I go, I taught little kids for a little bit, and I taught them about the stories of the prophets. And I grew up with Shia Islam, but since all the local mosques around me were Sunni, and my parents weren't very sectarian in their thinking, they went ahead and let me participate in these Sunni organizations. There was an Islamic competition that went on every year in the city that I was in, and I did well, a couple of times.
So what does that entail? Just like knowledge of the religion, or what?
Every year it's a little bit different. It'll be like a book, and it'll have a lot to do with some aspect of the religion, and they'll quiz you on it, and then there'll be a part where you're on stage. And I mean, there's all these sort of community type events that the Muslim community does, and this community happened to be a Sunni community, but I was still a part of it, and I participated, so I know a lot about Sunni Islam as well.
How unheard of is that, or like how big of a thing is that you were because for being an American and looking at trouble in the Middle East, well, Sunni and Shia killing each other again. Like,
yeah, I think it's a little weird.
Yeah, is that pretty? How commonplace is that? Is it just an Americanized thing that?
It happens when your only really outlet is through, like, your Shias there's very few of us, and so if you're in a city and the local mosque is a Sunni mosque, you're going to go to that one. Or your choice is to not go at all, and many choose to go. So some might not choose to go, but I think many do choose to go. So there were Shia people that I knew also that participated in these events. But
can I ask a potentially dumb question? And apologies for this, but is it apparent? Like, when you go to a Sunni mosque or something, like, do people know? Oh, that's not a Sunni. Like, how can people know from talking to you or from?
Oh yeah, they'll know.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
they would know. And
interesting.
Again, I'm only talking from my experience. So we participated in Sunni events, but mostly Islamic competitions and stuff for kids. But Sunnis and Shias pray a little bit differently.
Oh,
so
okay.
if you're doing prayer together, they can tell. And so I think that's why a lot of Shias don't. They don't participate, but it all depends on the region. It all depends on the family. My family was liberal enough that they thought that there was nothing wrong with this. So,
is that part of it too? Like, is it a tight knit community where everyone knows everyone already, like no matter what, that kind of thing? Or
Houston has a very, very large Muslim community. It's huge.
Oh, okay.
So no, but now there's actually large Shia community too. So Shias, I think in Houston, will just go to a Shia mosque.
Gotcha.
But if you happen to be like in a suburb where there's really nothing else, you might send your kids to a Sunni Sunday school, which is what my parents did.
So it's the kind of thing where it's like if a non-Catholic went to a Catholic mass for the first time and was like, what's this thing I got to do? Oh, I'm walking up here and grabbing some of the wine, like that sort of thing. Like you're just not familiar entirely.
Or maybe sending your kids to Bible study with that's by Catholics.
But I mean, in terms of like standing out is what I meant to say. Like you just kind of don't. There's slightly different customs or slightly different ways of doing things.
Right, there are.
Gotcha. Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah,
I didn't know how like obvious
of it.
So it's like a record scratch situation when you walk in the mosque and then everybody stops and looks at you.
Well, with with my age, people my age tend to be a lot more accepting of like Sunnis, more accepting of Shias, and Shias more accepting of Sunnis. It's older generation. I think it's a little bit different, but my generation tends to be a little bit more accepting, or at least that's how I saw it.
Now, I actually, if you don't mind, like I do find this really interesting, and the difference, Sunni and Shia, it all comes down to what? Isn't it like one of the early descendants of the Prophet and whether or not?
Right. It's more about who takes control after the death of the Prophet. So everything prior to the death, you can say that Sunnis and Shias agree on.
Gotcha.
And Shias split further into different kinds of Shias. And Sunnis have their own schools of thought. So there's differences.
Further
within
differences.
Yeah. You can just keep going for quite some time.
Is this the biggest split among the different little, It's
the most obvious one.
Most obvious one.
Clear one. I mean, and it's Shias have additional rituals that many Sunnis would, consider almost blasphemous. I'm not sure if a lot of people are familiar with what Shias do in the month of Muharram, which is this month where you essentially grieve for the death of this important person. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but that's essentially what it is. And it's this bizarre. I encourage everyone to look it up and look at the rites involved. And there are, essentially you go to a mass every day, what you could consider a mass, like a funeral mass, and people will beat their chests, in mourning. There's some people, they'll take chains and they'll like beat their backs with them. I mean, it's a strange. It's very ritualistic. And Sunnis don't do that at all.
Okay.
Sunnis don't do that at all.
Is that just like the fundamentalist Shia, or is that like everybody?
That's Shias in
That's
general.
all. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's just it's a common Shia thing, but Shias are not, from my experience, they're not as dogmatic. They're more ritual based. So they go to these rituals, but Shias tend to be, for example, Shias don't, the Hadith is a Sunni thing altogether. So that the entire part of the scriptures, Shias don't really prescribe to.
I did not know that. I feel so dumb because that's they're referenced all the time. I didn't know it was
Shias have their own. They have their own sort of scriptures. Also, in addition, they're fucked up in their own ways. But again, I know a lot about Sunni scriptures because of my time in
right. Another general question, if you don't mind, was I was just wondering, like how familiar were you? Now, you've said that you were, you mentioned these competition kind of things and that you were really in touch with your religion or at least knowledgeable of it. How in touch is the typical, I guess, American Muslim with the Quran? Is it like, because I know with Christians, it's like half the Christians I know, they don't even know what's in the Bible. They have no clue, you could mention something and they're like, oh yeah, is that, I don't know. Could be in there, but it's also, the Bible's an eternity long, so it's really it's harder to know everything in there. But what's your experience with that? Would you have known the Quran front to back, or what was your familiarity when you were a Muslim?
Well, my familiarity was pretty good, but I don't know how much I resemble the average Muslim. I don't think I do.
Okay.
What's different about Muslims is that Muslims live their lives more according to the Quran than Christians do according to the Bible.
Sure.
Whether or not, this doesn't necessarily mean they know the Quran better. It just means that their society hasn't really,
it's still structured.
away.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So in so many ways, when I talk to Christians, they don't even know that something is or isn't a Christian, belief. They just assume it is.
Yeah.
They'll just
Anything
assume it.
good, yeah, or like
Yeah.
anything like conservative or something, or marriage or whatever. Yeah, oh, that's the Bible. That man and a woman. It's like, well,
Well,
it's
they'll
not
just
really in
assume,
there.
right? Anything they think is good, they'll just be like, "This is in the Bible," and
Yeah.
anything bad isn't in the Bible.
Because like
Muslims
chances
are the
are,
same.
yeah, that's
Well,
funny.
So Muslims are the same way, but their society actually does reflect the Quran more closely than does Christian society. Western
Yeah.
societies reflect Christianity. So in that sense, they happen to know more, but not necessarily because they're more studious, not necessarily because they read the Quran more often. Large parts of the Muslim world, I mean, they're poor, they're not super literate, so we have those sort of issues too.
And that's also a problem, I'm guessing, because it makes the society way less secular, right? I mean, the religion is way more a part of like government and
Right.
everyday life and in the Middle East.
Well, what's interesting is that because Islam spreads so wide, and like Islamic, and what I call Islamic imperialism, they went and they conquered different peoples with different cultures. I mean, the first culture clash.
Talking the Ottomans.
Not just them, but also them. But when conquering Persia, conquering South Asia, these cultures are very different.
Yeah.
And when they adapted to Islam, a lot of this strange thing happened where parts of South Asian culture just became part of Islam. I mean, there was a fusion there a little bit. And so now that people are getting more literate, they're actually able to read the Quran literally, and they're able to see that, okay, well, this is actually a cultural belief that we've been doing and not what's in the actual Quran. So they're actually getting more literal in some senses. Some people are. I think Pervez Hoodboy, who is a Pakistani nuclear physicist, I think he's talked about this. I think it's him. I want to make sure to credit whoever it was that I got this idea from. I think it was him. But he talked about this a little bit. With the rising literacy, you also get rising literalism when it comes to religious belief.
Right.
In places like South Asia, where generally the religion wasn't so extreme, now you're having people who can read the Quran.
Yeah.
And they know, okay, oh, well, this thing that we're doing, this is just a cultural thing, and we can let go of that,
Right.
And here's what the religion actually does. So that's
really interesting. It's sort
aspect.
of like a toss up, like which will be better or worse. Like you don't know. It's just maybe they're getting rid of a bad cultural practice because it's not in the Quran, but who knows? Maybe they're getting rid of a good one.
Right.
Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, sorry for sidetracking you so much, but it's really I really like learning about this stuff. It's fascinating. So you're going to a Sunni mosque and that sort of thing, and so that's how you're familiar with that. But yeah, pretty quick 2-month deconversion-ish, couple-month deconversion.
A couple months. It happened very fast. This isn't common as far as I know.
Yeah.
I talk to a lot of ex-Muslims and I talk about their journeys, and a lot of people struggle with it for long time. But mine was, a couple of months, at maybe half a year at most.
Yeah.
I don't think it was any longer than that, but it was very quick. When it happened, it just like a house of cards, it just collapsed.
But how did that go with your family, though? Because usually with Muslims, I mean, that's going to be a pretty serious thing.
I didn't reveal it to them immediately. It took a long time for me to. You have to sort of gauge where they are and how receptive they are going to be this, because what you're doing is just it's a massive shift. You're not breaking the rules away. It would be different if I said, Dad, I have a boyfriend. That's one thing. But to say that, I mean, that is also terrible.
Yeah,
my parents would be very,
wow.
I mean, they would not be happy with that at all. But to say that I've lost my faith is something deeper, and it's not just with my boyfriend. They can say, okay, you have to break up with your boyfriend and I'm going to, have you talk to whoever, and we're going to set you to rights, and you'll be, hopefully, you're walking this wrong path, but you can go back to a life of virtue. But if it's something like a very considered disbelief, which is what I had, I think it was seen as more dire to my parents, because I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah,
because I'm really rejecting
it's more fundamental, everything. I guess. Yeah, it's not like a temporary thing you can fix by just dumping that guy you're dating. No. So and as far as that goes, that's just because you wouldn't be married. It's just you can't. Is that what it is? Or in terms of having a boyfriend being like this, also this really bad thing with your parents?
Oh, well, it's just Muslim cultures, most Muslim cultures, anytime, okay, to just let me apply this to everything that I say in the adult. Not all Muslim culture, right? But
no, you're speaking for all 1.6 billion. We know we can judge all of them based on what you're saying. Okay, go ahead.
So from what I understand, it's just isn't something that happens. You don't date before you get married. It's arranged marriage is very, very common.
Oh, right.
Some people do date, but it's not in the Western sense at all. You know, these are very, like, you're almost just spending time with them as a friend, if you are at all, but usually not alone. You know, you can spend time with them with also a group of friends, or spend time with them with your family, and that's the way I know some people that go around it. But for the most part, there is no dating really.
So is arranged marriage still kind of a thing even among Muslims in the U.S.? Like, or is it just in Pakistan?
It's not the same as usually. It's not the same as what it would be in Pakistan. So you might know them from a mosque or school or whatever. So you know this person and you're maybe already friends and you like them, and then your parents, figure something out.
But
so
it's still them. It's still them deciding, though.
Right.
Okay.
The parents have a role to play that they just don't play in Western unions at all. So it's definitely more extreme, but it varies from family to family and how liberal they are. Generally speaking, it's not like a Western courtship, or if it is, it's in secret.
Yeah.
You hide your boyfriend, that kind of thing.
Right.
If you have one at all. But I did not have one. When I was a Muslim, I behaved. I was a good Muslim.
How long did it take for you to, come out to your parents that you were an atheist?
I let them know a little bit at a time. So I didn't want to,
How does that work though? You pick like a random god and just say you don't believe in that god, and then eventually get all like 100,000. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it would be things like,
hey, Thor, I don't believe in Thor. Just letting you know. Yeah.
Like specific issues. Like I would start talking about, okay, well, these gender expectations are messed up. This female witness or whatever it is, these various aspects of how women are treated in Islam, and I could bring them up and talk about how that, this doesn't seem moral to me. I don't understand how this is moral, and I'd have them sort of explain it to me, and then we'd bring up another topic, and then another, and another, and then eventually I said, this whole religion thing doesn't make any sense to me. I don't.
Yeah, it's typical damage control with parents. You got to let them know a step at a time, kind of what's going on. You can't just give it to them all at once. I get it. Okay.
Yeah. And it wasn't something that they were happy about. It's still not something that they're particularly happy about.
So they're still devout, or more or less devout Muslims.
They're much less devout now, though.
Okay.
They're much less devout now, but they still, my mom at least still believes. And I think it's interesting because we're sort of, like I said, the first generation immigrants that are coming over, and then you come over and you have certain beliefs, and then your children grow up and come into their own. And so I think I see a lot of this in other families as well, where people just sort of either step out of religion or they decide to stay in and be more traditional, but it goes differently for each family. And the process itself is very interesting, but most families transform more than they thought they would. They give up more than they think they would give up. A lot of immigrants come into it thinking they're going to have the best of both worlds. They're going to have the perfect Muslim children, and they're also going to have, all the bounties of the Western world. But really, it usually means you have to give up something. So I think that happens more often than not.
Yeah. So let's fast forward then. So, but it would just let it suffice to say it wasn't like, you weren't disowned or anything. But your parents weren't happy, but more or less, you survived. The family survived.
Yeah.
Well,
we're fine.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear it, because that's not always the case.
That's not always the case, and it's not. Again, I say my cases, my experiences are different. My family is different, and I haven't seen that being replicated in a lot of the ex-Muslims that I talk to. A lot of them are more they're more concerned about what their family will say. They're more concerned about the way their family might treat them. I was not subject to any physical abuse, but I know that that's common. I know threats are common. I know, people saying that we're never going to speak to you again. All of that is very common. That didn't happen to me. But that's not, I don't I don't think, from what I know from the ex-Muslims that I speak to, I don't know how common that is. But it may also be the case that people like me, we just leave and we don't ever have any problems, so we just disappear and live on our lives. But I don't think that that's the case.
So at what point then did you go on to start or co-found, I guess, Ex-Muslims of North America?
So I met my first ex-Muslim after many, many years of being an atheist. I met an ex-Muslim, in the wild. And I didn't, at first I didn't believe him. I didn't think that he was who he said he was. That's how shocking I found it. Because for me, it was, once I decided that I was an atheist, I had to, it was a two-way process where people cut me off and then I cut people off myself, because I knew that they would be unhappy with who I was and what I thought. So there was a distance from me and my Muslim community, both a distance I created myself and them, some of them pushing me away. So I had lost touch with people from my background altogether because I just didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to face that at all. And I sort of instinctively knew it would come. So there was no point in hiding who I was. I didn't want to hide who I was anymore. So I didn't want to be among Muslims and have to pretend to be a Muslim myself. So I, lost touch with that community, with people from Muslim background altogether. A lot of Pakistanis, I lost touch with them. I lost ties with them. And then to be sort of reconnected and to meet somebody from my background who also left religion, who also was, liberal like me and had the same ideas about the harms that religion inflicts on people. It was so refreshing. And it was very validating because you really do think of yourself as crazy a little bit. And sometimes you feel embarrassed or ashamed for the difficulties that you put your family through because you think, maybe I'm just being very extreme. Nobody else does this. So maybe what I'm asking out of my family, this respect for my life, maybe what I'm asking too much of them and I'm being unfair to them. And then when you meet somebody else and that sort of validates that you have a right to be who you are, you have a right to, live life according to your own conscience, and to your own values, and you have a right to be respected and loved anyway. So it was validating in that sense. And so we talked a little bit about, this experience, and, he said that, maybe there's more like us, maybe we can find people. And so we started finding others and having these covert, secret meetings, and they started to grow. And then we started to find that there were people, and this other person, by the way, is Mohammed Sayed. He is the president now of ex-Muslims in North America. In any case, he started finding tons of people, and there would be people that would come from 8 hours away. They would drive to our meets.
Oh wow!
Just to they would drive 8 hours one way, stay the night, just for like a 2-hour meet, and then drive back. I mean, people were coming from far away just to spend a little bit of time with people who felt the way they did, and just to feel the sense of like we belong, and I'm understood, and I don't really have to explain all these things that I do with everybody else. So when we saw that people were going so far out of the way, this was such a beneficial thing. We thought maybe it'd be helpful to foster these types of local communities all across the United States and even parts of Canada. And the goal of that was just that you would have somebody there, in person, real life people. And we had learned a lot about security and privacy and all these things as we were bringing in people. And we thought that we could teach other people what we do, and we could, bring them into this organization, and they would have access to the local groups, and they could come and they could join the meets, and they could feel safe and secure and accepted. So that's what started Ex-Muslims of North America. So I think about a year later, we started the organization. We filed for 501c3, and here we are. We've grown. I think we're in like 18 cities. I'm not sure, but we're in many, many different cities across the United States and Canada, which is actually, it's surprising considering how dangerous it can be.
Yeah.
To join something like this. A lot of people are nervous, even when they come. They're like, "What are you? Like, what if this is a trap?"
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So a lot of people are very, very nervous, and they're also nervous to come because these are physical meets. So people are nervous when they come and they join because they're worried. What if there's someone here? What if they find out? You can get hurt. But despite all that, a lot of people, have been wanting to be a part of this, which is just, it's shocking to me that there are so many people that are excited about it, and many of them in much more dire situations than me. The biggest thing that you have to fear often is your own local community and your own family.
Oh,
So if you're not the way I am, you might have more to fear, and many people do have a lot to fear. They have a lot to fear from their own fathers. But they do it anyway. They come anyway, which makes me think that there's a real need for this, that people are going out of their way and risking a lot to just have a little bit of peace with some people who understand.
Right. And the more you can normalize it, the more it'll help everybody. So yeah, that's really cool. I love that story. Do you, are you still active in, in the meetings and all that kind of thing? Are you still meeting with people all the time?
Yeah, I try to come as often as I can. I'm not usually, it's one of those things that, running this organization, that's the thing that sort of gives me the most happiness. That's what makes me, meeting people and really talking to them and sharing their stories. And that's the most gratifying aspect of activism.
Yeah.
So if there's one thing that I would continue doing, even if I, if I step down from a leadership position, I would still, attend those and be a part of that.
Let's talk a bit about that talk you gave at the Humanist Conference, because again, I is that fair to say that's really what put you on the map in terms of the atheist community? Because that's certainly when I started seeing you everywhere.
I don't quite know, but I think it is. I mean, it's definitely when I think what happened is that it just like went viral a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think so. A lot of people happened to hear it, and it really resonated with a lot of people, which I was surprised by, because I went in thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get so much, like, I'm just going to get shit for this. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on your podcast.
Oh yeah,
but
that's fine. That's fine.
I just thought that, I just thought that it wasn't going to be well received. But I mean, there were people who still were not happy with what I had to say, but more than that, I got so many who said, thank you for saying what I want to say, but I feel like I can't. I feel like I'm going to be labeled as a racist or... Yeah,
it pretty much comes down along those lines, right? I mean, yeah, I think from my perspective, when I saw that it went viral, I think it's because there was a big demand for someone to say those things, particularly for an ex-Muslim to say them, because then it's like the classic... This is one use where I think the term regressive left really does apply. Because, and this is something I'd love to hear you talk about more, because I think that was a lot of the crux of that talk you gave, was you're not getting support from liberals, right? Is that fair to say?
It's not just I'm not getting support. Sometimes I'm actually being actively
You're right,
hindered by. I mean, it's almost they're an active part in opposing me sometimes. So that's what I thought was shocking and really very, very disheartening, more than anything that I've gone through as I've been an activist. It's been a couple of years now, but it's been the reaction of the left that's been the most disheartening. It's been their lack of support, but also active denunciation that sometimes comes from leftists aimed at people like me, or people that have messages like me. That's been the most discouraging aspect.
I know it's been a few years, like you said, but can you remember the first time that you thought that you realized, like, whoa, someone who I thought was going to be on my side, a liberal, someone who I thought I could count on, or a reaction online or whatever it was. When did you realize that?
There's definitely been times where that stuck out in my mind, but it was sort of a gradual understanding.
Sure.
And it was me becoming more involved in the secular community altogether, just atheism overall. More than anybody else, atheists tend to support people like me more than, you could say the right wing technically supports us, but not really though, because we're atheists, right?
Yeah. It's kind of a weird alliance, huh?
I don't even know I don't think it's an alliance. I don't think it's a true alliance. It's just for temporarily we'll side with you, we'll support you, we'll champion you. But they don't really champion what we stand for, the values that we stand for, which are liberal values. So within the atheist community, I think that's the most that we ever get support. The only group that I would say that I get, that I can expect a little bit of support. But even there, even in the atheist community, in the secular community, in the humanist community, there's been people that have thought that we were Islamophobic. There's been people that have, many people that have asked us to change our name. They said, why do you refer to yourself as ex-Muslim? It's really antagonistic.
Yeah, well, and that's ridiculous. Like, I think I've heard some other examples, and please feel free to, if any come to mind, but demands like that, where it's like, well, hold on, that's just me describing myself. Like, that's not antagonistic, it sort of shows, like, gosh, what must the mindset be if someone thinks that's like offensive, merely describing yourself as an ex-Muslim?
Right. And so it just goes, and many people want to talk about, with me, they want to talk about Islamophobia more than they want to talk about persecution of apostates. And it seems like a more pressing concern to them.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing to bring to someone like me. But that is what they want to talk about. That is what's on their mind. And it's, even though I'll talk about the persecution of atheists, that's my issue. That's how they associate me.
So it's that undue focus that I think maybe that's what you're reacting to as like regressive. Like people want to focus more on, so-called Islamophobia than the treatment of atheists in Islam or in Islamic countries.
Well, the term is bullshit, and I would prefer that we never use it at all. So anytime anyone says, oh, Islamophobia, I'll say, I'm not going to have this conversation because there isn't, as far as I'm concerned, it's a very damaging term to use. It's a term that's just cluttering up our dialogue. It isn't Islamophobia that we're worried about. It's anti-Muslim bigotry.
Okay.
Islamophobia.
So you wouldn't even like describe Trump or somebody like that as Islamophobic? Somebody who wants to ban Muslims, you would rather say they're bigoted against Muslims?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want to dig into that a little bit?
Islamophobia isn't. What Islamophobia does purposefully, groups like, there's certain groups that do it purposefully and some that just do it without thinking. It conflates criticism of Islam and bigotry against Muslims as a people, and that's a very, very, very dangerous conflation. It's something that will harm Muslims more than anybody else in the long run, and something that hinders progress because you can't criticize a religion without coming across like a bigot, or without some people assuming that this also means that you must want to do things like deport all Muslims.
Interesting. So is it that it's conflict? Because my take, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, but my take was kind of that Islamophobia, I don't know, when people were saying like by definition it can't exist because there's reasons to be afraid of Islam, like I think that was what Hitchens tended to say. Like I wasn't sure if that was accurate because like I can picture, Republicans and people like that who are just afraid of anyone who looks remotely Islamic or like anyone Sikhs, who they think are Muslims. Like, so my take was that, yeah, that is a real thing to be an Islamophobe, but people are using it incorrectly. Like they're saying anyone who criticizes Islam is Islamophobic.
I think the people that you're referring to who are afraid of Muslims, they are anti-Muslim bigots. So
that's just a more useful term.
I'm not saying that hate doesn't exist, that fear of Muslims that is perhaps irrational doesn't exist. It does exist, and then it would more properly be called anti-Muslim bigotry.
Okay.
But it's not. Could you imagine applying this to anything else? When we say anti-Semitism, we say that's what it is. It's anti-Semitism. You are bigoted against Jews. You don't say, I don't know, judophobia or
right. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
You don't tie that in. You say that. I could also say, imagine that to be in any ideology, capitalism, capitalism phobia or communism. You really couldn't.
I don't know. I think I know a few of those.
Well, but it's a strange thing to say because ideologies are different. We treat ideologies as different, and we treat hatred of ideologies as different and perhaps less damaging or more legitimate than hatred of people, and we should.
Okay, yeah, I could take that on. So it's in order to prevent this confusion between criticizing people and criticizing ideas, it's better if we say anti-Muslim bigotry rather than Islamophobia.
Well, what also happens is once it becomes clear, and I think it's already becoming clear, that there are parts of Islam that are just anti-humanist in various ways. Once that becomes clear, people are going to start using that as, because they conflate again the people with the ideology.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to think, okay, this criticism, this is legitimate, which makes it legitimate for me to attack them as a person. Which is also why we want to separate those two ideas. We want to separate them altogether because we don't want to allow criticism of Islam to be used as a reason to be bigoted against Muslims.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think one thing that your speech, maybe the Humanist Conference speech, one reason it might have gone viral, apart from many, it was a great talk. I loved it. I watched it at the time. But one reason it might have particularly struck a chord with people was they were, I think a lot of people are looking to be able to say, like, no, I am kind of afraid of Islam. Like, I am kind of afraid of elements of this religion, and I don't want to be called a bigot. Is that safe to say? Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that it's wrong to say that to say that given, our world today, that it isn't rational to be a little bit afraid. Or perhaps it is irrational, but it is human. It is understandable, even if it isn't rational. So I think that demonizing people who may look at the world around them and then find cause to be afraid, again, rational or irrational, but find cause to be afraid, I think demonizing them is, it's a little harsh and it's a little unfair.
Yeah, yeah. So what would you say when someone, I think this is maybe something Reza Aslan would say, or that, not, it doesn't have to be him in particular, but when someone maybe comes at you with, well, look at Christianity, look at what's in the Bible, like it's not, what do you say to those kind of arguments, like equivocating between religions?
Well, I have no problem with discussing the harms that have sprung from other religions. I think it's a worthwhile conversation when it is relevant. But in today's world, I think it is just dishonest to deny that Islam plays a bigger role in the lives of Muslims. It influences Muslims more than perhaps Christianity does. Definitely in terms of lawmaking, Islam has a much, I don't know exactly what to say, but I guess influence is a good word. But sometimes, it's almost some Muslim states, they resemble theocracies. Islam has an influence that, Christianity just doesn't anymore. So let's talk about it when it's relevant.
Sure.
So I'm happy to talk about Christianity and the Bible when it comes to, somebody torching in a abortion clinic. Let's talk about that. That's relevant then. But in today's world, in the political atmosphere we're looking at right now, in the what Majid Nawaz calls, the global jihadist insurgency, that's relevant to today's politics. That's relevant to what we're facing globally, which is why we really do have to look at Islam in particular. It's also wrong to say that people say all religions are good, or they'll say all religions are bad. And I think both of those statements are they're
even
incorrect.
Actually even worse. You know what I think is even worse? Let me know if you agree. Is Reza's stance is all religions are like essentially nothing. Like he thinks they're like, oh, there's not. It's just people bring whatever they want. It's a blank, and that to me seems absurd.
Of course, it's not true.
Yeah,
of course.
That's even worse. I would rather someone say they're all bad or all good. It almost makes more sense.
What I can bring in, that's one of those really obvious things that you should be able to dismiss without any evidence, because really it's presented without any evidence.
But man, there's like so many people who think that. But yeah, anyway, go.
I think people just like the way that
like
sounds,
yeah.
And a lot of Western Christians, it really is just a label for them. And even a lot of Muslims that would be apologists, the way Reza is an apologist. He occupies in a very small percentage of Muslims, who I think he was a Christian for a while, and then he, went back. I'm not sure exactly, but he's liberal, he's educated, he doesn't represent the average Muslim at all. At all.
To me, he's almost like a superhero for liberals. You know, he's like,
Right.
oh, look, this is a Muslim. He thinks everyone's equal, and he thinks like the religion doesn't really matter, but he's still proud of it. You know, like it's
that's who they want Muslims to be.
Yeah. They want every Muslim to be him. I really think that's it. And he has this rock star appeal because of that.
Right. And he's not even, is he not the average Muslim. He's not even the average, more progressive Muslim. He doesn't even resemble them. I think he's just so outside of that world, and I don't think he resembles them. I don't think that he has much credibility within real believers. But hey, I don't know. What do I know? But
what do you know? Well, you run an organization of ex-Muslims.
What I do know is that when I speak to ex-Muslims, I know I'm one of the few people. I would say it's me and probably Muhammad Sayyid who know more ex-Muslims than probably anybody who have have real relationships with actual ex-Muslims. And from what I know, people change when they leave religion. When they decide to leave the religion, they start questioning, hey, why do I have these feelings towards homosexuals? Why do I have this feeling? Why do I shame women who like to experiment with their sexuality? Why am I, they reevaluate those thoughts and they change those thoughts. And if it was the case that religion had nothing to do with it and it really doesn't influence your belief, people wouldn't change their beliefs about other things once they have left a religion. And it happens with ex-Muslims. It happened with me. Very, very rare is an ex-Muslim who was already super humanist and super liberal and left the religion and nothing changed. I've actually never heard of such a, I've never encountered such a person. Most of them, something changes, so, even something small, but something shifts. They decide to reevaluate something that they perhaps hadn't thought of it before. I know some people who are vegetarians once they leave Islam, whereas before it's animals are created for you.
And, well, do they start drinking more when they leave?
Well, some do, some don't. Usually they they don't drink until they've left. But yeah,
so then overall
that's
the curve would be that
but I would say but I would say that's something. I mean, some Muslims drink, some liberal progressive Muslims drink, they know it's bad, but they do it anyway. It's so some people do.
Where does that come from in Islam? Sorry for the ignorant question. Is there some sort of command that thou shalt not drink or something?
I'm not sure about this. So the actual the context of the story, from what I understand, it wasn't always banned, and then somewhere in between of the revelation of Islam, Muhammad said that no more of this. And from somebody told me a story, and I don't want to go into details because I'm not sure about this, but he said that one companion of the Prophet misbehaved a little bit too much when drunk. He killed too many camels or of somebody else or got into a fight or something like that. And somebody told me that was the background.
That sounds reasonable to me.
But
Who knows? But that sounds like something that would be in the Quran.
Well, yeah, don't quote me about that.
Sure. Well, but that's interesting in and of itself, though, that this was a custom that, like, I assume, were you brought up not, thinking alcohol was bad, or is that not part of your upbringing?
It's banned in Pakistan.
Right. So it's interesting already, even if that you don't know the origin really, even though you were under this rule, So that's an interesting
well, it's
datum.
just one of those things. I mean, think about there's so many things you don't know the origins of other than God said no.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know exactly why, or you're told a reason. So in Islam, it's about different states of minds. You don't want to, which actually makes sense to me. Like, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're not in your right state of mind. You want to be in a natural state of mind.
Sure, unless it's every single night after work. Yeah.
Well, so things that influence your mindset, like drugs and alcohol, are forbidden.
Right.
Which makes sense. I actually think that's one of those things that makes sense to me. There's quite a bit of Islam that makes sense, quote unquote. The reasoning sort of seems to check out. Maybe I don't buy it quite, but it's more reasonable than some of the other aspects, which are, the flying horse thing, and there's some stuff that's total nonsense, and
are
other
you
stuff
saying
that's
makes sense in the sense that it's good for you, or like it goes along with what you should be doing anyway? Is that what you mean when you say?
It makes sense if you're a devout person, that you would, alcohol does make you behave differently and may make you into a less devout person. When I was believing, so when I believed, that's why I thought I wouldn't drink, and that's what I was sort of taught, and it made sense to me, and it still sort of makes sense to me.
So you're saying, well, I was just trying to clarify if you meant like, oh, it's something you would still believe in, or it's like it makes sense as in you understand why Muslims follow it.
Right.
Okay. The second.
And it's not as if, so people, talk to me about this all the time, where it's like the whole of the religion is garbage. I had an argument with somebody. They said, you're an apologist for Islam do you think that anything in Islam any verse has anything of value? If you do, then you're an apologist.
Really? That's pretty absolutist.
Yeah, it is. But I get people like this. Nuts online, they say all sorts of things. You always get somebody. And I said, no, there's plenty that I think has value, that I think is interesting. Some of it is, plagiarized from, various schools of thought, some of it from Christianity or Judaism, but also other things, Arabic culture, whatever. And there are some things, they make sense, or they're not so bad, or you can understand where they're coming from. And even some things that are just genuinely positive. I think that, for example, I would say wanting to be empathetic towards the poor. That's something that was that I was taught as a Muslim, that I think you can legitimately say is a part of Islam. And it's something that, has value. It's not what I wouldn't say that if you weren't a Muslim, you have no way of coming up with this.
Yeah.
Other
No,
Muslims
I understand.
tell me that, they say, if you weren't a Muslim, how would you know that, it's not okay to kill your dad? I'm like, well, I feel like I don't need religion to tell me that. But
hopefully.
So it's one of those things. But
yeah, Jesus tried that whole giving to the poor thing, and it didn't really stick for Christians in this country. But hopefully Muhammad.
You do what Muhammad does. You say it's mandated.
He should have done that. No, well, Jesus's problem was he thought like the world was going to end immediately, so he's like, yeah, just give up your stuff. Who cares? The world's going to end like right now. And then later on, maybe that's why Christians today don't really pay attention to it. But so I'm curious what you, if you still have time, and if you don't mind, we could talk a bit about specifically why Islam might pose a bigger threat than any other religion. We started talking about that a little bit, but what do you think it is in the religion that makes it so that it's a particular possible danger to, I don't know, the world, to everybody, I guess, whereas other religions maybe aren't as much right now?
Well, it's not entirely what's in the religion. It's also the attitudes of the believers, and the way that Christianity has really been, if I'm focusing on Christianity in particular, but how it's just been declawed in a lot of ways, and the way that secularism has really taken away political power from Christianity. That has not happened with Islam. Muslims are still very devout. They still believe they hold themselves more closely to the teachings of the Quran. So even if we can say that the Quran and the Bible are exactly the same in terms of how much violence they can justify, even if we start with the assumption that they're both exactly the same, Islam would still be a bigger danger to society just based on those two other factors alone, because believers take it more seriously. Believers who are Muslim, they stick more closely to the teachings of their religion, and their governments tend to be intertwined with the mosque.
Do you think that's an accident, or do you think that in itself is also a product of what's in the books,
Yeah, that's something I could talk about for days. I think it's a very interesting conversation. I'm of the opinion that it is something that is a little bit more inherent to Islam than it is to other religions. The Islam to me feels like it's a political religion. To me, it's difficult to separate politics and Islam. And I know that Muslim reformers like Majid Nawaz, that's sort of his crusade, is to separate political Islam from, just a private faith. I don't know to the extent that that's possible. From my understanding of Islam, or at least the way that I was taught it, was that it's one of those religions that will take the victories that it has promised will take place in the real world. They're not going to take place in the hereafter. They're going to happen, and you have an active role to play in that. I mean, that's how I understood it. I would have to have a better understanding of Christianity to really make a great comparison.
Right, of course. Well, there's the passage that people cite, "Render unto Caesar." I don't know. I'm sure.
Yeah, whole two kingdoms, kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven and kingdom. Is that a thing? Is that a theory?
Well, I don't know. The passage I was talking about is just the verse that says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and God what is God's," or whatever. But so that, and it came up when I think someone was trying to trap Jesus into not paying a tax because he thought, again, like he didn't have to because he's the Son of God. But then in that passage he says, no, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And so I don't know if the Quran has an analog, if it has something like that. Maybe that could be part of it. I don't know.
As far as I know, nothing that clear.
Mm-hmm.
There are obviously, I mean, in any text that's longer than, you can always find things, and you can try and mold them in the way that you would like. I don't think that there has been that history either, because the way that the Quran has been interpreted also matters, because there's a whole scholarly tradition, and that tradition matters also, of Quranic interpretations and various schools of thought. And as far as I know, it's more involved in politics, more actively involved in politics than Christianity. And I feel that is inherent in Islam. I feel like that is one of those things that's going to be very difficult, maybe more difficult than it has been with Christianity, to change. But I support Majid Nawaz, and I support his mission, and I think what he's doing is very valuable. So even if I don't agree with it, I'll support it. And hope that he can, change hearts and minds. But I'm not so sure.
Yeah, Majid is really interesting, and the thing about the cartoon was just that's crazy. Where he tweeted that he wasn't offended by a Jesus and Mo cartoon, I think, and just him saying that was offensive so much to Muslims that he got just nonstop bashed from it, right?
It's interesting. He is maligned by Muslims all the time. So this is, I think, a very good exercise to see where we are exactly. We are in a place where somebody like Majid Nawaz, if you read his books, if you read his, the things he says, they're reasonable. They're totally reasonable. In fact, they're not progressive enough for someone like me at all, right? And if it wasn't for the fact that now I feel like I have these strange bedfellows. I have these Muslims who I don't agree with in a lot of ways, but we have some goals in common, and he's much more reasonable than
and just the fact that he's
else.
trying to accomplish reform, like it's almost a compromise of like, you're not gonna not gonna turn devout Muslims into hippies or something. Like there's got to be a bit of a bridge. So maybe that's part of it.
What I would say is, I don't know how active it can be. I don't think that's what happened with Christianity. I don't think Christians thought, when they were, humanism is, it began with Christians, right? There were Christians who were, the earliest humanists were Christians. And they, I think, from my understanding, they thought they were going to get closer to God, and especially with their understanding of the natural world. You're going to understand the natural world. You're going to get closer to God. You're going to get, you're going to. Yeah,
there were schools of thought of like, God has given us our senses and our reason and stuff. So therefore, if we use it, we'll be getting closer to him. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Right. And also just, I don't think they saw the danger that secularism posed. Or liberalism in general posed. They couldn't have seen it. It hadn't happened before. But Islam is not. Islam has the ability now to look at the example of Europe.
Well, there was a period of struggle between church and state, I think, in the Western world, and maybe Islam. It sounds like it just hasn't had that yet. it seems as though is there a Islamic State or that's a bad phrase. I'm sorry. Is there a
there is actually
is there a Muslim country you can think of that has that more of a struggle between church and state and not so much of a cooperation that there seems to be?
You can technically all of them do a little bit. I mean, the secular rulers and the but it's different. It's not like the people versus the church. It's more like the church and the secular rulers.
They're like kind of vying for power sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it went with Christianity a little bit. So maybe that's a good sign. I don't know. But so I was going to ask you, do you have any particular insight? And it's okay if you don't, because I know, your upbringing was pretty specific and all that. And we've talked about how you may or may not be like a typical kind of experience of being a Muslim. But do you have any insight as to the question that I think is talked about a lot in atheism and in regressive left debate, that kind of thing, as to whether or not Islam provides the fuel for things like terrorist attacks and suicide terrorism and that kind of thing? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, do you think the religion fuels that? Or do you think, there are some people whose theory is, no, these are just, that's not separate from the religion. Islam doesn't cause this terrorism. But what do you think on that?
No, I think it's it's nonsense to say that there isn't a relation. Of course there's a relation.
Is it a relation to even to mainstream Islam? Maybe that's a point people make.
Here's what I could say. It's not, if you are a Muslim, it is not necessarily true that you will eventually progress into a jihadi. I think that's wrong.
Sure.
So there are some people who see, all Muslims as jihadis and training. That's not true.
Which, of course, I mean, there's 1.6 billion. Of course, there's not 1.6 billion jihadis. Yeah.
And it's just, it's not true. And some of them might even become more devout and still not follow that vein of thought.
Okay.
However, that vein of thought does stem from the same religion that 1.6 billion people follow. It's the same.
It's a different stream of it, like a different kind of interpretation.
It's starting from that, and then they sort of, I would say, they are more tied down to the fundamentals of religion than are many other people.
Right.
A lot of people have made this argument, and I'm sort of in that camp, that there's a lot that some of these extremists do that, you can find examples in with the story of the prophet and his conquerings and his justifications for them, that's similar to what some of these extremists have been doing. But it's wrong to say that it will necessarily be that if you are a Muslim, I think that's the train of thought that's scary. That where people say if you're a Muslim, you're necessarily bound to become this way. You're not. There's a lot of ways to avoid that.
How far would you go? Does mainstream Islam give any sort of shield to that way of thinking, or can we separate it? Can we say no? Mainstream Muslims have no blame whatsoever to bear for something like, Islamic jihadis or whatever? Or do you think there's a little bit of responsibility? None? What range do you think that is? Does it provide a shield for them?
Well, I think, you can look at it as if you would look at, people who blow up abortion clinics, right? There's that extremist who does that, who thinks that, okay, a life for a life, I'm going to murder a murderer. Right. And then there's a large amount of Christians who are anti-abortion, and they think that it's murder, and they, and to some extent provide shield for those extremists, or at least they provide shield for their for their ideology. They give justifications for that ideology, and those extremists just take it one step further. And then there's mainstream Christians who are sort of, maybe sort of anti-abortion and sort of provide shield for those other guys. So I think it's something that just builds on, one shell at a time until you get to progressive Muslims. And I think even progressive Muslims have a role to play, and they have a responsibility in this, because if they're not pulling their fellow Muslims to be like them, if they're not pressuring them to be less extreme, less dogmatic, then they have a little bit of responsibility in this too. We all do, I think in that sense, like we can all play a role in this that's positive. We can all make this reality a little bit better, a little bit easier. But to the extent that some people say that it's all Muslims, it's not all Muslims. Westerners also have a role to play. Leftists have a role to play.
What do you see that role as?
Well, I think that, and I talked about this a little bit in my speech, but I think there's so much of the left has abandoned the causes that they purport to care about, like women's rights, gay rights, minority rights. When it comes to Islam, it seems like if you're from a Muslim community, then you're exempt from all these other rules. They'll bring down the hammer to misogynists in a Western context, right? Like men are manspreading or whatever it is that they're doing, and they're treated as criminals.
Yeah, for spreading your legs on a train a little bit.
That's I mean that's a little unfair of me. That's kind of one of those absurd things.
No, well, I was going with you. I think that's true. I think people will focus on that to an insane degree, and then when it comes to if it's somebody who looks like a Muslim, they're not going to be as quick to criticize their behavior.
And I think that comes from a place where they're trying not to be racist, but it's one of those things where the intent it isn't enough. You really have to do it with reason, and you have to do it rationally. And in this sense, I think it leads you into a less forgivable racism, which is to say that you will allow powerful people in brown communities to oppress others in brown communities, and it's okay because they're just doing it to each other. I've known FGM people who have sort of been FGM apologists, and they have all been leftists. Some of them, a few of them, even
that's a
people who
point.
would otherwise be feminists.
Yeah, I've never heard a Republican defend FGM. Right. Wow. Yeah, I've never quite thought about it in those terms.
So to me, that's very hard for me to forgive. It's very hard for me to then look at the left and say, well, you don't have, you're not racist. You are the anti-racist people. You are the anti-misogynist people, because you're not for people like me, only for other white people, other Americans or whatever it is, not for people like me. And that's very disheartening, because I came into, and I call myself still a leftist. I'm still left-leaning in the great majority of my politics. But I came into it because I thought the left stood for secularism. I thought the left stood for women's rights, for minority rights, for pluralism. And now I sort of feel like I've been deceived, because to some extent it seems like that doesn't apply to everybody. It only applies to some people. It only applies to people that are in the Western world. And so in the Western world, yeah, let's tackle misogynists. In the Western world, yeah, let's hammer anybody who disagrees with us in terms of racial politics or whatever it is. And for a long, I was with them. I was with them because I thought they would also be with me when it came to tackling things like the hijab, modesty culture in general in the East. I thought they would be with me there, as in the way that I was with them here. But I have found that that's not really been the case. And so that's been a constant struggle for me to feel that, my people don't really care about me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I remember actually years ago, it may have even predated all my podcasts, which is going to be a while ago. I started podcasting in 2010, but I remember getting into an argument with a feminist back when, arguments happened on Facebook. Now it's just, pictures of your dogs or your kids or whatever. But there was a time when Facebook was, at least for me and for my circles, more political and involved arguments and stuff. And I got in an argument with a feminist because I don't know if I was right or wrong, but my what I was expressing was I was lamenting the fact that people in the Middle East and women could be, and I use the term, and I want to get your take on this, if this is offensive or if this is what you would say, women are the women who are quote unquote brainwashed into thinking that the hijab and all these coverings and everything, niqab or whatever it may be, are a good thing. And I use the term brainwashed. I said, yeah, I mean, maybe they're saying that they like it, but don't you think they've been brainwashed by this religion? And there's a whole feminist kind of, I guess, view that even suggesting that a woman could be brainwashed is anti-feminist.
Which is outrageous, right? Because they will say that they would, if you talk to them about 1950s housewives, in America, they will say, a bunch of them were. If you tell them about all the women that were anti-suffragettes, they were anti or suffrage.
Oh
in general,
yeah,
and they
demonized
suffragettes, right?
Yeah.
There were quite a few, and it was some of them, there were women that were leading the anti-suffrage cause too. They would look back on that and they would say, of course, they were just brainwashed. Or
I should have asked that. Damn, that's a good point. What would you say about a housewife in the 50s? Yeah.
They would even say that right now, today, to women who say that they are not feminist. The women don't even have to say they're anti-feminist. Women, if a woman says she's not a feminist, they're going to say she is brainwashed. She's been. I don't know the exact terms the terminologies that they use anymore, but various ways of saying that she just has been taught to hate herself, and she just doesn't understand what it means.
Yeah.
And it.
In your view, then, people are brainwashed by religion, and they're brainwashed into doing things that are not necessarily good for them, and maybe thinking that they are good for them. Would you say?
Sure. I mean, that happens. That happens all the time. It's not just religion. Tons of ideologies have this hypnotizing, almost religion-like, but like dogmatic way of thinking that you get trapped into. It's human almost to just fall back on that. It's easier for us anyway. It's a mental trap. It's difficult to be a person who is rationally thinking in all aspects of life. It's an active role that your brain has to take, and our minds want an easy way out. They want to conserve energy. They don't want to have to worry about this, and they want to be able to just take shortcuts, and they do. So it's just a strange thing for me to have this conversation, and you're not, the only one that's had this conversation with feminists. I've had this conversation with feminists all the time. And it's absurd for me to have to sit there and defend this to somebody who has lived in the Western world, has really never faced the kind of misogyny that you see in Muslim cultures, never will, has no fear of that sort of thing, can worry about something like manspreading. And then they're the ones that are saying, well, the hijab is empowering.
Yeah.
Like, well, that's just.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it gives me pause, and probably me more so because I'm your typical white male. They always have that out of, well, you're just a typical white male, so you can say that people are of color or brainwashed or whatever. But so it did give me pause. I was like, shit, am I being an asshole? Am I saying something?
But you're not the only one.
Yeah,
It's not as if the only people that are not allowed to criticize religion in this way, or Islam in this way, are white males. That's not true. That's what they say. They paint them all as old white men that hate Islam. But it's Ayaan Hirsi Ali gets a lot of hate for doing what she's doing. I can't actually think of anybody, and I've said this before in some other podcast where I said, where can you think of anybody who criticizes Islam publicly, visibly, and gets away with it? Who in the sense that they can criticize Islam directly and talk about it directly as an issue and not be called a racist, not be called a bigot, not be called xenophobe or an Uncle Tom or a native informant or whatever it is. I can't think of anybody.
Yeah, I can't either.
I don't know anyone who's escaped this. So
well,
is it even possible to do?
We'll open it to the audience. Email us if you think of somebody, but I can't think of anybody. It's a good point.
Well, I think that says a lot about where we are and about why people are so angry when it comes to this topic of Islam, why it's so polarizing. I think it has everything to do with the political climate today. I think we talked a little bit about Trump, or you tweeted at me or something about Trump.
Oh yeah, shit. I'm so glad you remembered. That was like one of the main things I want to talk about. Let's get into that. So you said that you think the left is responsible for Trump. Now I get that it's Twitter, so feel free to clarify. It's you're using 140 characters or whatever, but that the left is responsible for Trump. Now I happen to disagree, but I'm open-minded. Like I would love to hear a case for why the left is responsible.
Well, so to clarify my Twitter comments, I don't think they are solely responsible. Sure. Right? It's not. Of course, there's a climate that has been fostered by right-wing media outlets and various demagogues that has allowed a character like this to gain traction. But the left has a lot to do with it. The current culture of I think in a variety of ways. Islam is a big topic. Islam is a big failing of the left, and I think that people see it to be a failing. People see it to be a case where the left is being very disingenuous because we have a president that's saying, Islam is a religion of peace, right after terrorist attacks, which I think is it's a very absurd things to say, and he doesn't have to say it. If he wanted to the effect of just protecting Muslims, all he has to say is, this you have Muslim neighbors who care about this country and love this country, and they're with us and we're with them, and there are many Muslims who don't believe in this, and that's fine. That's a fine thing to say. It's another thing to get into to essentially Quranic interpretation and say Islam is or isn't anything. He's making a statement about what the religion is versus what the people are. It's one thing to say that the people are peaceful, and I think that's a fair statement, and I think that's something everyone should say and talk about. But it's not fair to say that the religion is necessarily this way or that way, or doesn't have anything to do with this. I think that's an absurd thing for a president to say, and he said it repeatedly. And it's that sort of thing where if you're somebody, you're the average American, you hear something like this after, a terrorist attack, and you have little background knowledge about this. You don't really understand why this is happening. Why are they coming after us? Why are they attacking us like this? And you hear your president say that and nothing else, and offer no real explanations for why people from this religious background do this. I think it makes them distrust that leader. And I think that it has led to a distrust of the left. And I think that is something somebody like Donald Trump has pounced upon. It's a kernel of truth that he can own. Not only can he's the only one that's really talking. He's the only one that says, okay, Islam is a problem. And he says it unflinchingly. He just says it. And that gains a lot of credibility in the eyes of other people. And they can say that, okay, this is somebody we can trust to tell us the truth when Hillary Clinton won't, when Barack Obama won't. And I think that plays into his hands. And a lot of people have said this. I'm not the only one. I think.
Oh, certainly.
There's been many people.
I actually think I'm in the minority in disagreeing. If you don't mind, let me give you my thoughts on it, and feel free to come right back at me, or we can agree to disagree, or maybe I'll be wrong. That's okay. But my thoughts on that, and I actually did used to think that as well. But then I thought, what is the decision-making process that a voter should be going through? If we're going to look now, and I think you're right. I think definitely it's not helpful for Obama to say things like that, to say blanket Islam is a religion of peace. Period. I'm not saying that's good by any means. And I certainly think that anything a leader like that says that is, kind of, not really true and is kind of goes against what people's perceptions tend to be, that is going to create distrust. So I think we agree insofar as that. But when you actually get to the point where you're going to be voting, and you see one guy who's not to even mention all the other absurd qualities about Donald Trump and how unfit he is for office in every way. If you see him say, well, we need to not let Muslims in and until we know what's going on, that's not a solution to anything, by the way. That wouldn't have even prevented the terrorist attacks that he's thinking it would have prevented because they weren't immigrants. I mean, at a certain point, can't we reasonably say voters have a responsibility to look at it rationally and say, and even if they're not going to, that's fine. But if voters are irrational, then I don't think we can blame people for that, So what they would have to do is say, okay, Trump's solutions, which is absurd, which is bar all Muslims from coming into the country, something that's not, I don't even think is legal, and is certainly he's underinformed on every issue that you ask him about, knows very little about it, except he feeds on that, kind of racist tendency in the party, versus look at Obama. Now, sure, his words have said, oh, Islam is a religion of peace, yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, he's droning the shit out of people over in the Middle East. It's not like he's treating the Middle East with kid gloves and is giving them our nuclear weapons and stuff. I mean, you could say the Iran deal isn't great or something, but he's still fighting ISIS. He's still, killing leaders over there. Couldn't we say a reasonable voter should look at the two approaches and say, all right, I'll go with the one where the guy is maybe he's being a politician, he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth or whatever, versus the madman.
So I don't want to come across as somebody who's trying to rally for Trump. I am not. What I mean to say solely, this is what I mean to say, is that if you are a politician, yes, you have a responsibility to gain the trust of your voters, and we talked about this a little bit, right? And how I think Obama is failing in that aspect, but also to show them that you will represent their interests. And this has also been something that leftist politicians in general have failed upon. As far as the trusting is concerned, I think it's more than trust. It's a belief that he is authentic. That he is saying what is on his mind, and he's doing what is on his mind, and he's not being pressured by anybody else. I'm not saying to you that this is I think just to make it clear, I'm going to vote for Hillary.
Oh yeah, no, that's
think,
yeah. Don't worry.
That is the educated. I think. Well, I don't want to get into it. But,
well, I agree, and I'm glad to hear you say that. But yeah, I think the argument is still separate from that. It's certainly.
It's people. I think people are tired of being shamed by elites, and especially elitist media. Now, I don't want to sound like Sarah Palin when she goes off about the media, but I think that it is true, and it's fair to say that people are shamed, and there's a large part of the American population that is consistently shamed for not being informed enough, educated enough, tolerant enough, inclusive enough, or whatever it is. Right? They're made to feel not just that their ideas are wrong, and that's one thing, but that they are buffoons, and they are hateful, and they are primitive, and just not as cosmopolitan as these elitists. And I think that that's a real feeling, and that's not it's not unfair to say that the media sometimes you have a role to play in creating this sort of atmosphere, and this man refuses to be shamed, right? And so I remember back in I think it was November of last year, and I was telling everybody that I was getting scared. I was thinking, okay, Trump is rising, and you don't see it, but he's going to get stronger, and he's going to be the Republican nominee. And people laughed at me. My friends, they suggested, you're silly. This is ridiculous. Of course he's not. He's a clown. And I said, no, he's latching into a very raw feeling that many Americans are that many Americans are feeling. And in order to be an effective politician, in order to be a good politician, you have to be able to understand that people are feeling this hurt or this pain or whatever, justifiably or unjustifiably. They're feeling it, and I need to harness it and pull it into a good direction, in a good direction that'll be good for the country. And if you don't do that, you allow people like Trump to take the reins, and that's essentially what's happened. So he refuses to be shamed, and when everyone, it's not as if when he says there's blood coming out of her vagina, Trump supporters are necessarily agreeing with him there or thinking that that's true. What they're liking about him is that he says what's on his mind, and you can't embarrass him. Because he doesn't care about what you think. And this is juxtaposed to Hillary, who seems very polished and rehearsed, and she doesn't come across as authentic. And the message that people are learning from Trump is that this candidate thinks for himself, and he doesn't let anyone bully him into repressing who he is. Of course, it's ridiculous, but that is what they're thinking. That is what they're thinking.
Well, yeah, but a lot of what this is, okay, there's two particular things that I think are interesting here. First, I think we would need to separate whether when people say the left is responsible for Trump, do they mean more so than they would be for any other Republican candidate? Because I think that's important to parse out, because don't you forget, don't let no one forget, Ted Cruz said we should monitor Muslim communities.
No, I think more so than any candidate. I think Trump in particular. I wouldn't say that for Cruz. I wouldn't say that for Ted Cruz. I'm saying that for Donald Trump.
Oh wow! So you think? But the things you just said though, they apply to Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz said we should patrol mosques. Like he
No,
said some outrageous stuff that's not PC. He refuses to be shamed. He's got all the same qualities. But
I don't think he does. I don't think he has.
Well,
I don't think
okay,
he has
you're
the
right.
same maverick feel that Trump has.
That's fair. But I think he has some of the
Harvard grad. You know, he's been in the biz of politics for much longer than Trump has. So I think he has a very different feeling.
So then so is that the difference, that Trump is more of an outsider? Because I was trying to take the things that you said and respond to them and say that Cruz has a lot of those factors.
I don't know if he does, though. I think I don't know if Cruz is the refusing to be shamed kind of thing. Like I don't think he has it in the same sense that Trump has. Has he said the same sort of offensive things as Trump has?
Well, like I just said, he said we should patrol Muslim communities. That's about the most offensive thing. I mean,
when did he say it though?
He said it
after the Trump thing, or?
Well, I don't know. It was that debate. It was one of the, probably, who knows, the second to last debate or something, where, I mean, they all, you could make the argument that Trump ramped it up for all of them. That's certainly true. But I just,
he brought it to another level. I mean, there was the plane that everybody else was playing in. There was what Trump was doing. And also he doesn't care what the Republican establishment thinks of him either. And I think what he stands for is a candidate that is anti-PC. And I don't think that Cruz has that same vibe. I don't think that Cruz gives off that same feeling, but Trump does.
Okay, well, let me just clarify. The point I was going to make is, and there's actually an early debate among the Republicans where Fiorina said, and you know it's early because Fiorina was in it. She said, she gave a speech about how PC culture was like ruining everything. So the point I was going to make is, I think that's a Republican thing. Like most Republican candidates had, I think you could point to a time where they said people are being too PC, people are blah, blah, blah. And so I'm not sure I see how in particular Trump and none of the others are a product of the left. You know what I mean?
I don't think they all are to the extent Trump is. I wouldn't, for example, Bush. Would you have said that about Bush? I think he's very yeah.
Jeb is just we
a
product.
About Jeb.
Yeah. You had to remind me. Please clap. Jeb I would say is definitely, that's an establishment thing. He's a product of the Republican establishment for sure, and not really. I mean, the funny thing about this whole process of watching all these debates and how awful I think Trump is and everything is, I ended up liking Jeb. I was like, oh, come on. Vote for Jeb, everybody.
I would say I started liking almost every, except for Cruz, who I thought Cruz would have been worse.
Yeah.
But I think it's, to the extent that it's the left's fault, quote unquote, for making somebody like Trump, is that they've fostered this PC culture. And I know it's such a soundbite. It's such a thing that, right-wing pundits talk about all the time. But I do think that there is a grain of salt in there. And I think it's hard to deny where, we're in the society where if you say anything critical about the religion of Islam in particular, you're going to get into trouble. But also there's such a thing about, like if you say, for example, in certain aspects of feminism, you can't criticize without being labeled a misogynist.
Sure.
And when you create this sort of atmosphere, then you're forcing people to be inauthentic, to lie about what they really feel for fear of being shamed or for fear of being labeled, something they're not. I know people who have been called anti-Black because they didn't like some of the actions of Black Lives Matter. Right? Not the entirety of it, the social justice people and everything, but they've been called anti-Black. That's a pretty harsh word. I know some people who've been called racists because they oppose reparations, or they've been called misogynists because they didn't think the wage gap was really something of heavy concern. And that there's a very big difference between hating women and thinking that a fact, presented by some people about compensation isn't true. But routinely you see this conflation. Right, this unfair demonization of people, and I see it all the time. And I operate in leftist circles, and I see it constantly. And I think it's very unfair. And I think that it pushes people who are moderates, who are leftists, to be more sympathetic to somebody who just doesn't give a damn the way Trump does. what's worse is that many people don't see this shaming as a problem. A lot of people think it's a good thing. It's a virtue. They think shutting down a conversation when they don't like what their opponent is saying is fine. And in fact, even I think preferable to, the messy business of having to debate them.
Yeah, I agree, but I just think these things get applied too broadly. I mean, to give an example, you went on Ruben. We were talking a little bit before recording. You haven't really followed much of his show, but one thing that disappointed me about Ruben, and feel free to not even address this if you don't want, because I don't want you to say, give an opinion of something you don't know about. But one thing that frustrated me, and has frustrated people like Ina on Twitter, somebody I interact with, is he under the guise of anti-regressive left and, let's stop this PC stuff, he just has racist after racist on his show. People like Tommy Robinson, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, for fuck's sake, like people that are
so Milo is a very interesting character, right? I mean, Milo is somebody that I think he's somebody I can say more so than I can say for Trump. For Trump, I'll say, okay, part of it, the left bears responsibility. For Milo, I would say entirely he's a media creation. He didn't have to happen. He didn't have to have the power that he has. He has it because of the backlash that he received, because it grew him into this cult-like figure. And at any point, that all you have to do with somebody like Milo is take him seriously, is just debate him seriously, is not to every time that he went into a campus and some feminist or whatever it was hollering at him or screaming at him, that gave him power. He loved it.
I agree with that. Actually, I agree with that.
And I saw this. I saw Milo from his beginnings, from when Gamergate or something. I don't know what it was that he latched onto. I think it was Gamergate. Right in the beginning when he latched onto it, I could tell that this is somebody who, he could be no one, or he could continue growing, and he did. And he grew because of the reaction that he got. And every time he got a reaction, he just grew that much, and his visibility was just increased. And this is somebody who we have no reason for somebody like Milo to exist. The few times that Milo is honest, or he's giving facts that may be worth considering, they have been said by other people, and we should just address them. The few times that he's reasonable, we should just address those times and then disregard the rest. But what's happening is that people are, they're trying to get him kicked off of stage. They're trying to get him, no platforming and all this stuff. All it does is empower him. You're creating a monster.
Oh, I agree. I agree with that. I think that's right. And I could be wrong, but I think the first thing I remember him is is it Tim Hunt? The guy, I think that was the thing that he latched onto. Because he battled feminists over the scientist who said the thing that someone reported that he said women should be segregated.
No, he was getting bigger before then. He started with Gamergate, but the Tim Hunt thing is also one of those things where I thought that was awful. I thought this guy didn't, we could debate about whether or not it was misogynist what he said.
Sure.
But I thought it was unfair. The treatment of him was very, very unfair. And it's one of those extreme examples that teaches you a little bit about the way that people are feeling in general.
But here's my question to you. I agree with that. I understand. I actually am fully on your side, on the side of always debate these people. Don't cause violence at Milo's talk at a college. Who gives a shit? Like, he's just going to say some crap that is, easily refuted by facts. I totally agree on that. But the only point I want to make, and let me know if you still disagree, and that's okay, is do you think you should give someone like that a platform, though? Like, do you think that, because Ruben keeps having him on, and I think it's a product of, again, he wants to get access to his large audience, because Milo has a large audience, but he keeps having him on. Oh, let's talk about the fact that, like, all your views, and let's get him out there. And like, there's a difference between saying, yes, this guy, should be allowed to speak at a college if people want him to speak at a college, and shouldn't be interrupted by, loud feminists shouting him down and physically stopping people from entering his talks. I get all that. There's a difference between that and then trying to give Milo a platform on purpose.
Well, I don't know what's wrong about giving him a platform. CNN gave him a platform recently. Was it CNN? I think, but more recently. And when you're doing something that, when you're encountering somebody who's doing newsworthy things, I mean, as a media figure, I don't see why it's wrong for him necessarily to host somebody like that.
I think it's because, and this may be, again, a product of, I've been following Ruben a bit. I think it's because the line is always, we need the conversation to happen. We need the conversation to happen. And then there's only one person. There's only one side of the conversation. It's not a conversation. It's you've invited Tommy Robinson, or you've invited the guy with the racist views that it's okay to come on your show because you let everybody talk, even though it turns out you're just letting racists talk. Like,
did you watch the Tommy Robinson interview?
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
I think he's an interesting case because he's somebody who will kind of agree in conversation. I've spoken a lot with Ina because Ina actually had a debate with him on Godless Spell Checker, I think. And he's a weird guy where I think he kind of goes along with you in conversation. And then once you turn off the mic and he's out making news headlines, he's saying racist things again. He's saying, so like that, but that's the kind of thing that you need to challenge him on what he said, like that's something that I don't like. That's not happening. He's coming on and he's making nice and he's saying he's putting on a nice face, but then he's continuing his tweets right after that appearance are still terrible. Like he's still tweeting anti-Muslim stuff, stuff that I think you would, if you went back and looked, you would agree was anti-Muslim bigotry, Yeah.
Well, okay. So to clarify, I haven't seen the Milo interviews with Dave. I have seen other interviews of Milo, so I am familiar with.
Yeah,
he says the same
thing.
stuff. He says the same stuff over and over. I did see the Tommy Robinson interview, and I actually found it to be really, really interesting.
Yeah,
and I have never heard of this guy before. I'm just, I guess, stereotypically American in that sense that I'm
sure. Yeah,
he's some
more
red
of a UK
guy. I don't know who.
Yeah, he's a UK figure. Yeah,
it was very interesting. And as far as the tweets, he, whatever he tweeted after, I think it's unfair to say that Dave is responsible for, what this guy does, just because.
No, he's not responsible. Don't you think? And that's why it even is more important that Dave at least do some elementary research and say, hey, in the past, you've said that women should, like all this sexist stuff, like at least bring it up, because people like you who didn't know him, who had no idea who he was, now all of a sudden, oh, he's this reasonable guy on the show. Cool. Like, don't you think it's somewhat incumbent on an interviewer to do some research and say, oh, this guy has said some really shitty things before. Like, maybe I should ask him about it?
I think it may come down to interview style. I think that when I was on, Dave Rubin's show, he didn't give me any hardballs either.
No, he's the softball guy. That's
yeah.
True.
I think that's kind of his interview style in general. So I don't know if I can be, and if I can say that this is unfair because you were so nice to him and you were so mean to me, when I was talking, because he's generally pretty, he lets them talk and he lets them present themselves in the best light that they can, which I think is, it's unique in some senses, because you really don't see that in modern television anymore. I mean, I can't think of anybody where I see that. I can see how he's trying to model himself after Larry King, and I can see him evolving in his interview styles a little bit. And I haven't been watching some of his more recent stuff. I've just been too busy.
Yeah, but
I'm unsure. I guess I'm unsure for why it's so important that Tommy Robinson be seen as that everyone be uniform in their opinion that he's a super hateful bigot, because I am, I just watched that one interview, and some of it was a little iffy. Some of it made sense and I could sort of empathize with what he was saying if it was true. And I felt that, okay, he presented himself as fairly conciliatory. He didn't seem anti-Muslim. He talked about, good Muslims that he knew and his work with Majd Nawaz or whatever, and all of that was positive. So what's the harm necessarily with leaving that interview as is, in your opinion, with somebody that didn't know Tommy Robinson, watched that interview, heard all those things, and he wasn't hateful towards Muslims, really, in that interview. And you leave that interview, is the harm just that now they think this person who really
You're
secretly is...
You're giving a platform and a shield to someone who has said really, like, you know Maryam Namazi, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually slightly interacted with this guy on Twitter, with Tommy Robinson on Twitter, because he was saying, he was tweeting Maryam pictures of her nude protest and then shaming her for her body, and was saying, like, he's not a cool guy. Like, he's and it's not like I need him to be crucified. I'm not saying, and I get that. I get that there's this overreaction among PC people, but I don't know. I kind of have a problem with not even bringing up some of these horrible things and then pretending like you're having all the important, hard-hitting conversations, you know? Like, it doesn't... Imagine if you were a Maryam and having had this interaction where he's sicking his followers on her and saying, like, oh, yeah, I can't... This is like... It was his response to her making a point about something he said. He said, oh, how about this, where you're check out this counter argument, and then it was shaming her for how she looked in this nude protest. I can even probably find it. I tweeted it at the time. And imagine her seeing this guy come on Ruben and, all softballs, no problem. Like, I don't know. If you were maybe on the receiving end of some of this guy's hatred, wouldn't you feel a little betrayed if someone like Ruben just gives him a platform? It's all happy. It's all smiles. Nothing's challenged. What if he was, like a anti-black racist? What if he was, don't you think we should at least bring that up? And like,
I think let me clarify a little bit about what you said. So the problem is that he is not giving him hardball enough questions, and he really should have. Or not had him on at all.
I would say not have him on at all, or at least address, like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but like, if someone says quite publicly, by the way, and not years ago, and not like some random thing, like very clearly horribly misogynistic things, do you not think that you should try to bring it up, like, in an interview? Is it... I don't know. It's weird to me. I don't.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's consistent with Dave's style.
Well, sure.
That's been his style, so that's what I would expect if he was going to have anybody on. To the extent that Tommy Robinson, troubles me. I mean, he would trouble me if he literally said anti-Muslim stuff, like on air, and then Dave said nothing, like if he said really racist stuff, but it seemed to me that he wasn't, I mean, like you said, he wasn't his extreme self.
Well, but he
got to present sort of the best.
Isn't that almost somewhat worse? Like, cause he hides it. Now I know this is particular to Tommy Robinson. I actually don't think most people are like him. Like, he does a weird thing where he kind of puts on a happier persona than he is on Twitter and in these other news stories that I've seen in interviews and stuff. But doesn't that kind of make it worse? So now Ruben has drawn attention to this guy, and Sam Harris didn't know who Tommy Robinson was and tweeted like,
I didn't.
Yeah, you didn't. Oh, this is now in your mind, in Sam Harris's mind, this is an okay guy. This is a stand-up guy who just has some good things to say about immigration or something.
Well, that's not true. That's not true. I don't think that's true. I think it's that, even people that I think are racist or bigots can have some things to say that are interesting or worthwhile. Can have a few points that are worth listening to. I don't,
Here's where it might be a problem. Let me just real quickly, I'll give you a scenario, see if you know what I mean. If not, it's fine. We can kind of leave it where it is. But let's say you or Sam Harris, which actually happened, tweet, oh, I like this Tommy Robinson interview. Great interview, whatever. When people who have been a victim of, or been a target rather of Tommy Robinson's hate see that, how do they know that Sam Harris isn't, like endorsing that? Or, isn't it somewhat problematic to give this guy a platform to make him look like something he kind of isn't and never challenge him at all?
Well, it's if it's something that's generally what you do on your program, you have hard-hitting questions, and then you don't do it for this guy, it's clearly unfair.
Okay.
If the format of your show is to allow your guests to present them in their best possible light, and I'm assuming this means having controversial people and having put themselves on in the best possible light, then I think it's fair. I mean, it's interesting to me that CNN, NBC, I mean, all these places, they always have controversial people. And many of them, there are interviews where they're softball interviews the whole time. But that seems to be okay. But
well, I don't watch CNN, so I guess that's why. I don't know.
Well, I mean, interviewers in general, they'll have controversial people on, and controversial people will gloss over things.
Well,
and
I think that's okay if you get controversial people from both sides on and do that, but it's only the one side is the thing. He only gets anti-regressive left people on to talk shit about the regressive left. Like that's the entire thing. So I guess that's why it bugs me, but it's okay. If I get it, if I get your point where it's like the expectation is what it is, and I mean,
I don't think the damage is as extreme as everyone seems to think. I mean, if it's not as if, I watched the Tommy Robinson interview, and I came across thinking, okay, well, in this sense, in the sense, only the sense that he presented on there, it seems reasonable. That doesn't apply to his entirety of being. It's not as if, in our interview, suddenly it makes me feel like this person is acceptable in every sense. And all you have to do is Google him to then see, all the different ways that media thinks about him and all the different opinion articles that have been said about him. So I think in that sense, Rubin's, what Dave did was in contrast to everything else that Tommy has out there. So if it'd be one thing if, nobody knew of all this extremist stuff, but with Tommy, it's so easy to get. It's really hard to get is where he can really just speak his mind and be in an audience that doesn't already hate him or isn't already ready to label him as one way or another. I actually think that I watched after that because the whole controversy happened on Twitter. I'm like, who is this guy? Why are people concerned about him? And then I looked him up, and then there was plenty of negativity.
He's awful. He's a really awful guy.
Yeah, there's people that took his tweets and all this stuff. And other than Dave's interview, I actually can't think of. I didn't find any where it didn't feel like it was just an attack zone where people just yelling things at each other, and perhaps correctly when it comes to Tommy. But
there are some examples. I mean, like I said, the thing with God the Spell Checker, and then that show actually referenced there was a long-ish, it was like an hour or so. I don't know if it was a documentary or like a piece because it was British, so I don't know how the hell their TV works or whatever. But it was a longish piece about him and Mo Ansar, because Mo Ansar was like trying to change his mind or something. So I mean, he's been given forms before, but I understand. Well, I want to say I think I've taken enough of your time, and let me just say I really, really appreciate the dialogue on this because it's been really fun. Like I like to be able to have the disagreements and hash it out and get your side of things. And I get it. I understand where you're coming from. So thank you so much for at least being willing to go in the paint and have that disagreement there.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a good discussion. I hope I mean I could go on and on about any of these topics for a long, long time, but.
Well, don't say that, or I'll make you come back and we'll talk about more stuff.
But this was very good. I think this was good. It was a good chat.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to have you back if there's another topic that we want to get into, because I had a great time and I love talking to you, and it was really cool to hear your story and everything. So thanks so much for joining me, Sarah Haider. Oh, where should we point people?
Well, I have a Twitter. It's at Sarah the Haider. It's Sarah the THEHAIDER. That's my Twitter. Otherwise, please check out the Ex-Muslims of North America website. That's www.exmna.org. And that's our website. You can learn a little bit more about our organization and what we do. And please, if you have some time to support us in some way, we would really appreciate it. And that would be really helpful.
Awesome. That sounds like a great organization. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for giving me so much of your time. And I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on. It was fun.